everyone, welcome. Today we're going to be reviewing the nervous system for those of you that are studying for the ATI TEAS or the HESI A2 exam. The information regarding the nervous system for both these exams is going to be the same. So everything that we learned here about the nervous system today is going to be relevant to both of those exams. The only difference is that the questions are worded differently. The questions are going to be different for ATI TEAS and HESI. So practice questions, you want to look at something that, if you're studying for ATI, look at ATI practice questions. If you're studying for HESI, look at HESI practice questions, okay? So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started with the nervous system. So the nervous system breaks off into different divisions. Two major divisions are the CNS and the PNS, central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. So CNS is your central nervous system. I'm going to shorten it now with NS, okay? And then we've got your peripheral nervous system. Central nervous system is going to include your brain and your spinal cord. So your brain and your spinal cord. The way you can remember this is CNS, central. What is at the center of your body? Your brain and your spinal cord area are in the center of your body. So remember, center, central nervous system, brain and spinal cord. And of course, this includes all of the nerves that are in the brain and spinal cord, like your cranial nerves and like your spinal nerves. Everything else that is not within the brain and the spinal cord are going to be your peripheral nervous system. This is all of your nerves in the rest of your body, in your arms, in your legs, coming off, branching off of your CNS. These are all your peripheral nervous system. Now the PNS breaks apart into two other subdivisions, the somatic and the autonomic. Your somatic system is under voluntary control. Meaning that we have conscious control over the somatic system, meaning we can think of a movement and the somatic system will take care of it, right? We can think to, let's say, catch a ball or pick up our groceries or throw a ball or jump. All of these things are going to be under voluntary control. We voluntarily, consciously thought about doing them. So they're going to fall under somatic system, okay? Now, somatic system is going to affect your skeletal muscles. So you can think of it like this. If you voluntarily, consciously think, I want to jump, I want to skip, I want to run, I want to throw a ball, well, all of these movements really involve mainly your skeletal system, right? Your skeletal to move you. So it's going to affect your skeletal muscles. Now, autonomic is quite the opposite. Autonomic is involuntary control. Involuntary control is you have no conscious control over any of these movements. This is going to affect your smooth muscle generally, which includes your heart muscle and your glands. Autonomic, involuntary control, you have no conscious control over it. It's going to happen whether you wanted to or not. Things like respiratory rate, heart rate, those are probably the two most important things. They happen without our conscious control, right? For example, to breathe, our diaphragm is under autonomic control. Our diaphragm is just going to contract and relax throughout the day without us thinking about it, and this is going to help us breathe. Our heart is also going to beat all day without us even thinking, hey heart, can you beat? No, it does it automatically, autonomic, okay? Somatic, these are the ones that you're going to use usually when you're like doing some kind of exercise. If you need to lift some weight, you need to play some basketball, you need to shoot, that's going to be under somatic control. Okay, so autonomic, involuntary control, further subdivides into two other categories: sympathetic and parasympathetic. Your sympathetic system is known as your fight or flight. Okay, fight or flight. The reason it's called fight or flight is because it's activated when we are in a situation where we feel like we need to fight or take flight. These situations might be stimulated by the E's, the 4 E's. Remember these, okay? Exercise, emergency, excitement, and embarrassment. Okay? So sympathetic system, SY for system, is triggered by these 4 E's: exercise, emergency, excitement, or embarrassment. All of these are going to trigger this sort of excitement in us that's going to say, do we want to stay and do we want to fight, or do we want to run and we want to take flight? For example, say you are on a safari and a lion friggin' comes up to you and it starts to chase you. You have 2 options. Am I going to stay and I'm going to fight this lion, or am I going to take flight? Okay, that is your fight or flight system. Now, certain things are going to happen in your body to help you to survive. These things are going to be these 2 that I'm going to point out first. These are probably the most important for you to remember, and one of them is increased heart rate and force of contraction. So increased heart rate and increased force of contraction, well, this is going to help because it's going to put more blood circulating around your body, especially your muscles, which are going to need it to run. Next, you're going to have an increase in respiratory rates, okay? You're also going to have an increase in the dilation of the bronchi in the lungs. So you see how these are going to help you with survival. Oh, one other one. You're going to have increase in pupil dilation. Increased pupil dilation, how is this going to help you? It's going to help so that you can see better, right? So all of these things that are going to happen in your body during fight or flight are going to help you to survive, okay? Now, these are not the only things that happen in your body. There is a huge list. It almost affects every single organ in your body. But I would say for the TEAS exam, HESI, remember these are definitely the most important, okay? A good way to remember what triggers your fight or flight are the 4 E's: exercise, emergency, excitement, and embarrassment. When you're in these situations, these things are going to happen to your heart, your lungs, your pupils, okay? Now, your parasympathetic system is going to do the opposite of sympathetic. It's actually called the rest and digest. Rest and digest, okay? So everything that happens here is actually going to be counteracted here. For example, instead of your heart rate increasing, well, you just want to rest now. So your heart rate is going to decrease. What else is going to decrease? If you're resting, what else is going to decrease? Your respiratory rate, right? You don't need to have a high respiratory rate if you're just resting, right? What else? Instead of having your pupil dilate, they're not going to dilate, they're going to constrict. Instead of having an increase in dilation of the bronchi in the lungs, well, you're gonna have a relaxation. I'm not gonna write it down because I don't really have enough room, but just know that here you're gonna have an opposite effect, okay? It's gonna decrease. So over here, remember we have our 4 E's, and these trigger sympathetic system, right, into fight or flight. Well, over here, the parasympathetic system is triggered by rest. It's just triggered by rest, okay? When you're at rest, these things are gonna help you relax. Also, when you're at rest, what happens in your body is maintenance to keep and maintain homeostasis, okay? So think of this also, maintains homeostasis. Rest and digest, but it wants to also maintain homeostasis. Now over here we have the 4 E's. Over here we're gonna have something called the 3 D's. So I am gonna write it up here. Okay, these are diuresis. The second one is digestion. And the third one is defecation. Diuresis means to pee. Digestion just means peristalsis, right? All your food is moving through your digestive system. Defecation is to poo, okay? So these three things are gonna happen during rest, right? Because that is part of maintaining homeostasis in your body. That is maintenance, right? To secrete and to defecate all of this waste product. That's all maintenance in your body. So just remember, in parasympathetic system, this is gonna be your time to go pee, to go poo, and to rest, okay? But sympathetic, why would it not benefit us to, need to go poo or pee? During fight or flight, you really wanna focus on things that are gonna help you survive at that moment. And going poo or pee is not gonna help you survive at that very moment, okay? Okay, I hope this makes sense to you. Just remember, nervous system goes into CNS and PNS. The PNS is gonna be the one that subdivides into a bunch of other subdivisions, right? So PNS divides into your somatic and autonomic. Autonomic, like automatically it's going to control smooth muscle, okay? Somatic, voluntarily, you consciously think about moving skeletal muscles, right? Okay, your involuntary autonomic system is going to further subdivide into your sympathetic, fight or flight, or your parasympathetic, rest and digest, okay? So we're gonna go ahead and move on to our CNS. Alrighty guys, so again, the nervous system breaks down into your CNS and your PNS. I've written down here the subsections of the PNS, just in case you need for reference. But we are moving on to the CNS, the central nervous system, which includes your brain and your spinal cord. Your brain and your spinal cord are center, right? Central nervous system. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so here we have 2 major sections of the brain. The cerebrum, which includes 4 lobes. It includes the frontal lobe, which is at like the front part of the brain. Here you see the eyes, the mouth, and the nose. That would be in the front part of, your face. So this is the front part of the brain. So this is frontal lobe. Your parietal lobe is right over here. Your occipital is in the back, and your temporal is right here by your ear. And then snug down right back here, you have your little brain, which is the cerebellum, okay? So your 2 major parts, your cerebrum, which includes your 4 lobes, and then your cerebellum, your little brain way back here. And then attached to this is, of course, your spinal cord that goes down the back. So your temporal lobe is going to interpret sound. And that's generally, okay, and what I feel is most importantly, because all of these lobes interpret so many different things, and some things are overlapping, and it can be a lot. And especially if you're studying for the TEAS exam, you really don't want to fill up your head with every single little thing that each of these interprets or is related to. Just focus on the high yield things, which in my opinion, temporal, sound is where it's at. Sound is what you really need to focus on that happens here in the temporal lobe. For occipital lobe, it's going to be vision. So anytime you see something, it's going to be interpreted in the occipital lobe. Parietal, you're going to interpret any type of touch, like pain, like pressure. For some reason, on exam questions, they like to focus on the frontal lobe and cerebellum. And I'm not sure if it's because frontal lobe, there is frontal lobe dementia, which I believe is pretty common. And I'm not really sure if that's why they, exams tend to focus on frontal lobe. But it affects a lot of important things. So let's go ahead and write those down. One of those things is memory. The other thing is behavior, judgment, problem solving, and written and motor speech. I'm gonna write it up here, okay? Written and motor. Motor is meaning the ability to physically move your mouth to make a sound of speech, right? So written and motor speech. So your frontal lobe, some of the major things that it interprets is memory, behavior, judgment, problem solving, written and motor speech. I do suggest that frontal lobe, you remember all of these, okay? Lastly, we've got cerebellum. So your cerebellum helps coordinate voluntary muscle movement. Some examples are, of course, generally your posture, your balance, and generally your coordination, okay? So let's go over this little part here. Now, you might want to think this is your spinal cord, but this is actually your brain stem, this little part right here, okay? Your brain stem. And your brain stem includes 3 parts. All right, the first part up here, this part actually, it kind of goes in here, okay? Just imagine it's actually right here. This is your midbrain. Next, you have your pons. And lastly, you have your medulla oblongata. So medulla. So your brain stem is composed of your midbrain, your pons, and your medulla oblongata. Remember, your midbrain is not so much where I drew it here, crunched up here. It's actually pushed up into the brain a little bit more. If you were looking here at my face, it kind of looks here like it would be here, right? But it's kind of up here more. Okay, this is your midbrain, your pons, and then your medulla oblongata, and then it extends into your spinal cord right here. Spinal cord. Because I haven't really seen any emphasis on this on the exam, I'm not going to go through what really they interpret. I think it's just more important that you know that these 3 are part of the brainstem and they're located right here. One more thing I want to show you is this meninges that cover the brain and the spinal cord, okay? So you've got this stuff called meninges, okay? Meninges are a protective layer that cushion the brain and the spinal cord. Brain, okay? There are 3 layers. The first layer, I'm gonna show you right here. The first layer is the innermost layer, and it's called your pia mater, okay? Your pia mater is going to be attached to your brain tissue. So it's going to surround the entire brain like this. And your spinal cord like this. Okay, so that's your inner layer. Your pia mater is your innermost layer. Your pia mater contains blood vessels. And of course, if you have blood vessels anywhere, what is it going to do? It's going to supply oxygen and nutrients, but it's also going to transport out waste product, okay? So that's your pia mater, and that's its function. The second layer is your arachnoid layer. Arachnoid, okay? So that's going to go right on top of your pia mater. Arachnoid has something special. It has CSF in it. CSF. CSF is your cerebral spinal fluid. I'm going to write it up here, okay? CSF, cerebrospinal fluid. And this stuff does the same thing that the meninges do. They protect and cushion the spinal cord and the brain, okay? So protect, I'm gonna write protect and act as a shock absorber, okay? Your outermost layer is your dura mater, dura. So this is gonna go right outside your arachnoid, just like this, okay? This is your outermost layer, your dura mater. Now, what is out here? You've got your brain tissue on the inside. You've got your pia mater. You've got your arachnoid. You've got your dura mater. And then what is out here? Well, this is your skull. So you understand how your dura is your outermost layer and how your pia is your innermost layer? So CSF and your meninges work together to protect the brain and the spinal cord. They act as a shock absorber just in case you have any impact. If you get punched or if you get smacked or whatever happens, you get in a car crash, these things are there to help cushion the impact so that you don't have any damage to this internal tissue, right? This soft tissue right here. Okay guys, before I erase this, let's just go ahead and review it again. We've got the cerebrum, which is the largest part of the brain. We've got the cerebellum, the little brain. We've got the brain stem that comes right off of the brain. It includes the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. Then comes your spinal cord. You don't need to worry about any interpretations here, but you do have to worry about the interpretations of the lobes, specifically focused on frontal lobe, okay? And we've got memory, behavior, judgment, problem solving, written and motor speech. That's all frontal lobe. Parietal is touch, occipital interprets vision, temporal interprets sound, generally, okay? Generally. So cerebellum is going to help coordinate voluntary muscle movement. In other words, it's going to help with your posture, your balance, coordination, okay? We've got two protective things going on here. One are your meninges. There's 3 layers. Your innermost layer is your pia, which has blood vessels. Your second layer is your arachnoid, which has CSF fluid. What is CSF fluid? It protects, it's a fluid that protects and acts as a shock absorber. And then you've got your dura. Your dura mater is the external layer, and it's a hard layer, okay? And then after your dura, what do you have? Your skull, okay? And your CSF, meninges, again, what do they do? What's the whole purpose generally of them? They help protect your brain and your spinal cord from shock impact. So let's go ahead and move on. We're gonna go ahead and look at the structure of a neuron. So here we have an entire neuron. A neuron is a specialized cell inside of the nervous system. Now, there are a few key structures that you need to memorize. Let's start with here. This is the cell body. Okay, so the cell body interprets incoming signals or messages and generates the appropriate outgoing signal or message, okay? Now, these incoming signals, these signals or messages that are coming into this particular neuron come in from the dendrites. The dendrites are these that branch off of the cell body. And a dendrite receives incoming signals. So the dendrite is going to receive incoming signals. So messages are going to come into this cell. they're going to come in through the dendrite, they're going to come into the cell body. The cell body is going to read that signal or message, and it's going to generate the appropriate outgoing signal or message. Now that outgoing message that is leaving the cell is going to leave through here. This is called the axon. To here, this is your axon. Your axon is signals that are leaving the cell. Axon is the pathway that signals use to leave the neuron. So here, signals are coming in. They're getting interpreted by the cell body. The cell body is like, okay, this is the appropriate message. Let me send it out this way. And it travels out the axon. And once it gets here, these are your axon terminals. At the axon terminal, there's a communication between this neuron and another cell. So this is the communication center at the axon terminals. So communicates with other cells. So again, receiving information comes in through the dendrites, it gets interpreted at the cell body, and here the cell decides what is the appropriate message to send out. Whatever the message is, it sends it out through the axon, and it eventually is received at the axon terminal. Here at the axon terminal, there's going to be some communication that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But first, there's something going on the axon called the myelin sheath that we need to talk about first. So what I've drawn here in brown, extending down the axon, is the myelin sheath. The myelin sheath wraps around the axon kind of like a band-aid, and it leaves these spaces. These spaces are called the nodes of Ranvier. So each one of these little spaces is like a little junction here. And the reason why these nodes and the myelin sheath is so important is because it allows the electrical impulse. Let's just say this is the electrical impulse coming out this way, okay? This electrical impulse, instead of going straight down the axon, what it does is it jumps from myelin sheath to myelin sheath to myelin sheath. Doing so helps speed up the conduction. So the myelin sheath and the nodes of Ranvier helps speed up electrical impulse down the axon. Nodes of Ranvier and myelin sheath speed up. So action potential is the most appropriate word for electrical impulse. So you might not see the word electrical impulse on your exam. You might actually see the word action potential. So make sure you write that down. Action potential is electrical impulse. So nodes around Ranvier, myelin sheath help speed up action potential by allowing it to skip, okay? So there is a difference in the myelin sheath between the CNS and the PNS. Okay, so in your CNS, your oligodendrocytes are going to produce myelin in your central nervous system. But in your PNS, your Schwann cells are going to produce myelin, okay? Remember that. CNS, oligodendrocytes produce myelin. PNS, Schwann cells produce myelin. Both myelin do the same thing. They're gonna help increase electrical conduction. Okay, so we've gone over all the parts of a neuron. Now let's go over the synapse. The synapse is this area where the communication from one neuron to another, or one cell to another, happens. So let's zoom into this area here. Okay, so we're moving on to our synapse. Our synapse is our communication junction, in short. It can happen 3 ways that the synapse is involved. It can happen between one neuron and another neuron, like this example that I'm going to show you right here. We've got neuron number 1, and we've got neuron number 2 here. If an action potential happens between two neurons, what's going to happen? Well, that action potential is just going to travel past to the next cell. A neuron can also communicate with a muscle, in which case what's going to happen is a contraction, a muscle contraction. A neuron can also communicate with a gland, and what's going to happen here is there's going to be a hormone release from the gland, right? Okay? So, synapse is the communication junction. Like I said, we're going to be looking at communication between a neuron and another neuron. The synapse involves this terminals right here, these axon terminals, and it involves the tip of these dendrites of the second cell right here. So this whole thing is what we're pretty much looking at here. So I'm actually going to make this axon terminal a little bigger. Axon terminal. Make it look a little bit bigger, okay? And I'm going to make this dendrite of this second cell look a little bit bigger too, so that you can see what's going on here, okay? So this is the dendrite. So the interaction is between one cell's axon terminal and the dendrite of the other neuron. So why is the dendrite communicating here? Because remember, the dendrite is receiving incoming information. So since number 2 neuron is receiving information from number 1, it's gonna receive it through the dendrite. And why is the axon terminal involved here? When neuron number 1 wants to give out or send out a signal, it's going to do so through the axon and the axon terminal. Okay, so let's look inside of the axon terminal. Inside of this terminal, there are vesicles. And remember, vesicles are just like little sacs that hold special little packages. And in this case, that special little package are going to be neurotransmitters. So these blue things are neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitter. And what do neurotransmitters do? They send messages. So our messages are inside of these little vesicles. Well, those vesicles need a signal to let them release the neurotransmitter so that the neurotransmitter can travel to the next cell. So here's what's going to happen. Action potential, which really is just an impulse, right? Action potential is going to travel down the axon. It's going to travel down to the axon terminal. When it hits the axon terminal, it is going to open these little channels on the terminal. This opening here, right? These openings here are going to let calcium ions flood in to the terminal bulb. So calcium is going to go in. It's going to flood the terminal. Once calcium goes in, it is going to signal these little vesicles to move towards the dendrite and open up and release those neurotransmitters. So they're going to open up, and those neurotransmitters are going to go across the synapse, and they're going to be received by the second cell. Specifically, there's going to be these little tiny receptors, right, receiving the neurotransmitter. So there's going to be these little receptors, and the neurotransmitter is going to go in there, and it's going to go in here and be received. So that is basically how one neuron communicates with another. Basically, action potential eventually hits the axon terminal, step 1. Step 2, calcium channels open. Step 3, as the calcium floods into the terminal, it's going to tell the vesicles to release the neurotransmitters. Step 4, neurotransmitters are going to be received by the receptor in the second neuron. Okay guys, I'm going to erase this. So this is basically how one cell communicates, how neurons communicate with other cells. We're gonna go ahead and move on to glial cells. Glial cells are another type of cell found in the nervous system. Okay, like I said, cells in the nervous system include our neurons, but they also include glial cells. We also call them neuroglia. Now, the CNS and the PNS, central nervous system and peripheral nervous system, they have different glial cells. So let's take a look at CNS. Okay, so the glial cells in the central nervous system. One, you have astrocytes. Astrocytes function as metabolic and structural support. You have microglia. These are going to remove debris. You have oligodendrocytes. Remember, these make your myelin in the CNS. In your PNS, you're going to have Schwann cells. You're not going to have these, but you'll see that in a bit. And number 4, epidermal cells. You're going to have these to cover and line cavities. These are kind of like a skin. Okay, in your PNS, peripheral nervous system, you have satellite cells, which are support cells, and you have Schwann cells that make your myelin. Instead of the oligodendrocytes, you have Schwann cells. Now, I know this is a lot to remember. In my opinion, there are 4 that are really important to remember. First, oligodendrocytes, you have to know this, that it makes myelin in the CNS. And Schwann cells, you absolutely have to know that this makes myelin in your PNS. Secondly, maybe remember astrocytes and satellite cells. And then lastly, I really haven't seen this on the exam, but I just thought I would add it in here just in case if you want to take the time to memorize it. But these 2 right here, okay? So I have one more thing to review with you guys. Let me go ahead and take this down. Okay, so let's look at this. This is the reflex arc. And basically, the reflex arc is from the moment that you have a sensation on your body, how does it transmit an impulse to your CNS? And then how does your CNS respond to your body with the appropriate message, okay? So this, first of all, this is a cross section of the spinal cord within the CNS. And then this here is an arm. This is a muscle. And here this person is touching something hot, accidentally touched a candle, okay, of the fire on the candle. The first thing that's gonna happen is there is a nerve in here. And there are dendrites on this nerve. And these dendrites are going to interpret the sensation of pain from this fire touching, okay? It's going to interpret that pain. And it is going to send that signal up here. Now the end of this dendrite, where it felt this sensation, this is called the receptor. And this is the first part of the reflex arc. So a receptor is the end of a dendrite where a stimulus is detected. So stimulus or stimuli detected. First thing, stimuli is detected. Now this signal is going to go up the nerve and it's going to go towards the CNS. So this sensory neuron is going to take this message over to the CNS. Once the sensory neuron is here in the spinal cord, it's actually going to meet with a interneuron. Remember, this interneuron is the connection between the sensory and motor neuron. 3 is the interneuron. So the interneuron is the bridge between sensory and motor neuron, okay? So you can guess that what comes out of here and comes back to the body, specifically the muscle, what comes out of here is your motor neurons. So number 4 is your motor neuron. Okay, and this motor neuron is also called what? Efferent. Efferent neuron, okay? This motor neuron is going to reach this muscle right here. This muscle is called the effector. Remember, an effector is something that the nerve is effecting. So it can either be a muscle or a gland. In this case, it's your muscle. So it's going to tell your muscle, hey, move out of the fire. This thing hurts, okay? So this is step 5. The motor neuron is going to reach the effector muscle and signal it to move. So this is your reflex arc. From step 1, the stimulus. Some sort of stimulus is detected on the dendrite specifically, okay? In this case, this person has their hand on the fire and they're like, ooh, what's this stimulus? That stimulus is going to go up into your sensory or afferent neuron. It's going to go into your CNS. Specifically, here we're looking at the spinal cord, right? Within here, it's going to reach your interneuron, which is a bridge between the sensory and the motor neuron. It's going to go past the bridge, and then it's going to come out with the motor or efferent neuron. When it comes out, this motor or efferent neuron is carrying a message of what should this muscle do. So it's going to tell it, hey, contract so that you can move your hand out of the way. And remember, effector, number 5, effector is either a muscle or a gland. In this case, it is a muscle. Okay, so I just want to emphasize that your sensory and afferent neuron, you have to know this, okay? You have to know what it does. Sensory or afferent neuron is sending a message towards your CNS, okay? What is the message here? The message is that, ooh, I just touched something. Something feels like fire. Sending a message towards your CNS. Your CNS is going to interpret that message and find some kind of appropriate response. Once it has it, it's going to send out that message to your motor neurons or efferent. E for exit. I know some people like to use exit because it's exiting away from the CNS. So your motor efferent exiting away from CNS towards the body, okay? You have to know that. If you're going to know anything from the nervous system, you have to know sensory nerves is the same as afferent nerves. It's sending messages towards CNS. Motor neurons, efferent, sending a message away from CNS towards the body, okay? Let's do that again. Sensory nerves, sending messages from peripheral nervous system to the CNS. Motor neurons, efferent, sending messages from the CNS to the body, okay? I think that's pretty much it. I hope you learned something new, and until next time.